Hi, I'm Tim Cresswell and I'm talking to you from Edinburgh. And the prompts that were provided to me got me thinking about ethics and the ethics of place and the local in particular. And so hopefully what I'm going to say will be a provocation and can help me engage in conversation with those of you who know a lot more about partnerships than I do. So we'll see how this goes. So I want to focus on place and localness in relation to different ways of thinking about ethics. The two main ways of thinking about ethics, as I'm sure most of you are aware, are consequentialist and deontological. So I'm going to take each of these in turn. A consequentialist approach to ethics says that an act is good if the consequences are good. Kind of, in a rough approximation of the ends justifies the means. So the question then with a consequentialist approach to ethics is how we know the consequences of our actions. The problem being that our actions are divided in time and space from the consequences. We can't know in advance for sure what the consequences of our acts will be, and neither can we know when we're distanced from the consequences of our acts what they will be. The second of these is important for place because there's a sense, at least, that we can act more ethically when we know the consequences on our neighbours, on our family, and on the immediate place around us. There's a sense in which the local can provide an arena for ethical action, which is guided by good consequences in ways that distanced relationships can't. So, familiarly in consumption, when we buy a pair of trainers in Edinburgh, we can't know too much about the consequences of that act for people who make them in Indonesia. Whereas we may know more about the local cabinet maker who we order a piece of furniture from, and when we see her at the local coffee shop, we can remind her of something that didn't go quite right with the piece of furniture, or she can remind us that we haven't paid our bill fully. So that kind of local place-based engagement provides a frame for a consequentialist view of ethics in quite different ways than a distanced relationship would. The second mode of ethical reasoning is deontological, and that simply means that there's an agreed moral code that you follow regardless of the consequences. It is right to do X. It is wrong to murder people. There's an absolute moral code, even though it is probably the case that there are instances in which murder may have the best consequences for the larger number of people. Classically, we can think about, if you travelled in time, would you murder Hitler? That kind of argument. So how do we know a moral code? Well, again, place becomes important because to share a moral code, you kind of have to know people. And even in an era of mass communication, which does indeed muddy the waters for both of these views, we have to know other people to share something. So it's reasonably easy to share a moral code within a family, within a close-knit group, with neighbours, and potentially within a local place, and much easier than it is to share a moral code across distances, unless we use a sort of different approach to deontology. So classically, I think the argument is that an agent-based deontological approach would suggest that we do things for our family, for instance, that we wouldn't necessarily do for others. So I may save the life of my child, even if the consequences for that saving would be bad for a larger number of people. It's just an absolute moral code that I would follow. And such moral codes are quite, they're just easier to share in what we might think of as community or local place, Gemeinschaft in Tony's sense. So both the consequentialist and deontological ethical approaches have a place-based aspect to them, or at least we can locate both of those views in place and say that place makes a difference. So once we've established arguments for an ethics of place, we have to ask ourselves how particular actors in a place are ethical or otherwise. And it seems likely, for instance, that there are different levels of ethical commitment at play depending on the degree to which a partner in a partnership is located in a particular place. Imagine, for instance, a partnership between a local government organisation and a multinational corporation. The members of the local organisation reside locally, their jobs are local, their social interactions occur within a local context, and as it's a government organisation, they're even elected locally. None of these things are necessarily true of a multinational corporation. David Harvey has charted the relative lack of commitment to place of capital, for instance, which he described as footloose. Capital can take up and move relatively easily from one place that is no longer profitable and is conceptualized as dead capital to another part of the world where profits can be increased. Where labour, on the other hand, lived, embodied, place-based labour, with all the social reproduction networks of home, social life, community life, cannot simply move as easily. And even if it did try and move, it may well be labelled economic migrants and be prevented from moving to the place that the labour would want to move to. So there's an imbalance of commitment to place between different aspects of that admittedly dramatically binary partnership between a local organisation and a multinational corporation. So using that, I'd like to think about the ways in which some of the issues in that kind of partnership may be involved in any form of partnering in place, where at least one of the partners is not identifiably of the place or local. Any local place is an assemblage of materialities, meanings and practices, and each of those have their own ethical dimensions. And each of those at any given point in time combines a vertical axis of time, how it connects to the past of the particular place it's in, and a horizontal axis of space, how the place, the materialities, practices and meanings of place are connected to other places through one form of connection or another, communication, mobility of people, capital, things like that. Each of these has ethical dimensions that warrant further investigation within the context of partnerships in and between public and private organisations. Place is not just a location for things to occur in, but a life world that demands its own ethical commitments. And with that in mind, I look forward to our conversations on Friday and for learning a lot more about partnerships, which I am not well informed on. I hope that these place-based and ethical philosophy-based thoughts will be helpful to our conversation. I look forward to seeing you.